What if superheroes existed in our reality? Okay, here's a different question. What if a comic book came to life?
And he's found it. A rubber glove sandwich.
This is the question that producers Phil Lord and Christopher Miller asked themselves when they conceived of their crazy $90 million experimental film called Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the first theatrically released animated feature ever to contain an Avenger. Consider this, a physical comic strip, a series of framed images put out in sequence to tell a story, same as any animation or any movie for that matter. The difference is that despite the restrictions imposed by a purely visual format, comic books are able to convey vast quantities of information and story across remarkably little space. Take a closer look at this 6-panel episode from Stan Lee's Sunday newspaper series The Amazing Spider-Man, which debuted in 1977 and just recently saw the culmination of its 42-year run. The story introduces Spider-Man's latest confrontation with Morbius the Living Vampire. In just 6 frames, we're given enticement, context, a flashback, suspense, conflict, and a good old-fashioned cliffhanger. 6 distinct story devices across just 6 unique frames. Or look at this one, published in 1984, which illustrates 4 individual scenes and plot threads. One between Spider-Man and Clug Manton across 3 panels, one with Aunt May, one with Robbie Robertson and J. Jonah Jameson at the Daily Bugle, and one in a hospital. Each contains its own cast of characters whose relationships and emotions are discernible in an instant. By adopting the artistic tools and strategies utilized by paper comics to tell their stories, Lord and Miller and their animation team were able to achieve a level of comic book sensation not possible in live-action superhero movies or even traditional CG films. Look again at this panel from The Amazing Spider-Man. Notice the line work on Jameson's face, particularly across his jawline, around his mouth, and above his eyes. They telegraph his anger and frustration instantly and unequivocally. But lines this pronounced don't exist on the human face, and they don't typically exist in computer-animated movies either. They do, however, exist everywhere in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. The film adopts a familiar 2D comic book style and then impresses it onto a modern 3D rendered image by implementing the same use of hand-drawn line work, or form lines, that a comic book does to accentuate definitive emotions. Into the Spider-Verse is able to make the raising of an eyebrow or the crinkling of a nose speak volumes, even on a paused frame. When Disney and Pixar created WALL-E over a decade ago, they did something quite unusual. They sought the help of legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins, director of photography on The Shawshank Redemption, No Country for Old Men, Skyfall, Blade Runner 2049, the list goes on. They had Deakins consult them on the film's visuals, specifically how to accurately emulate real-life camera work and its tangible effects on an image, depth of field, lighting, lens aberrations, properties which, in a computer-animated movie, are not incidental, not natural. They are properties that can only exist by being observed, understood, and skillfully replicated. Deakins' work on WALL-E, and later Rango and the How to Train Your Dragon series, was so influential that every year contemporary 3D animated movies inch increasingly closer to that blurry line between the real and the virtual. But while animated movies like Toy Story 4 and WALL-E seek to replicate real-life filmmaking methods, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse sought to avoid them. The Spider-Verse team motto quickly became, "If it ain't broke, break it." Consider this scene from the very start of the film, when Miles is riding in the back of his father's police car. In this shot, Officer Davis turns his attention from Miles back to the road in front of him. But did you notice what just happened? With a physical camera, when the focal point of a shot transitions between the foreground and the background, it's called a rack focus. So when Officer Davis is facing Miles, Davis's face appears to be in focus, while the street behind him appears out of focus. Then when he turns back to the road, the focal point changes. Except inside of a comic book, we don't see blurred bokeh effects, and so we shouldn't see them in Into the Spider-Verse either. And in fact, we don't. What we see here is actually little more than a doubled image. The filmmakers on Into the Spider-Verse refer to this technique as misalignment, and it's based on a physical phenomenon that can occur when a comic book is misprinted, a common ink effect where the ink bleeds over the edge lines. Misalignment is used constantly throughout Into the Spider-Verse as an alternative to camera focus in order to direct characters and backgrounds towards or away from the viewer's attention. The idea behind Spider-Verse's aesthetic was to abandon anything that didn't belong in the illustrated world. The filmmakers used color smears, action lines, and multiple limbs instead of motion blur to indicate movement. They used onomatopoeia to visualize sound, text boxes to communicate thought, and hatching and halftoning to substitute traditional light and shadow. The objective in designing the animation style for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was to make every paused frame of the movie look like a panel straight out of a comic book. And in that pursuit, the Spider-Verse creators revolutionized the way comic book stories can be told using motion and sound, all by adopting techniques from a medium that contains neither. And while some of these techniques have been used in live-action film adaptations, sometimes to great effect, sometimes less so, the leap to animation from comic books is even more intuitive. Animation lends itself to a more quickly believed fantasy world. The medium freely welcomes the use of Kirby crackle, burst cards, exaggerated villains, and even the inclusion of this guy.
Spider-Pig, Spider-Pig. Does whatever a spider...
without having to first work to suspend its audience's disbelief. And while Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse could go down in history as a singular gem of its genre, I'm very glad that this franchise will continue, that Marvel and Sony have chosen to invest in the full breadth of possibility laid out by the medium. And that by asking a different question, by bringing comic books to life, the Spider-Verse team have managed to craft not just another action movie with superheroes as characters, but a comic book movie with people as heroes. Hey everybody, I'm Danny Boyd. What's your favorite on-screen Spider-Man of all time? All Spider-Verse iterations included. Leave a comment, and be sure to find me over on Discord. Invite link is in the description. Until next time.